Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst into the weird and wonderful attic of history. We're going to be trying on some of the strangest gadgets and gizmos ever invented. Contraptions designed by brilliant, eccentric, and sometimes just plain weird minds to solve the problems of their day. Our first stop is the Roaring Twenties, an age of jazz, flappers, and overwhelming noise. And if you were an office worker then, desperate for a little peace and quiet, you might have been tempted to try a device that would make you look completely ridiculous and probably cut off your oxygen supply. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I love seeing where in the world these stories are landing. Go ahead and drop your city and whatever time it is in the comments below. It's a quiet thrill to see our little community of night owls stretching across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you're in a bustling office in the 1920s. The air is thick with the clatter of typewriters, the incessant ringing of telephones, the chatter of your colleagues, and the roar of traffic from the street below. This is a new kind of world, a world of speed, efficiency, and constant distraction. You have a report to finish, a brilliant idea to formulate, but your brain feels like it's being pulled in 100 different directions. How can anyone possibly focus? And then, your boss wheels in a new device. It's meant to solve this very modern problem. It is a helmet, a massive, heavy-looking helmet made of solid brass, resembling something a deep seed diver or an early astronaut might wear. This, he tells you, is the Isolator. You lift the heavy brass dome and, with a deep breath, lower it over your head. The world vanishes. The clatter of the typewriters, the ringing phones, the voices, it all recedes into a dull, distant, muddy thrum. The inside of the helmet smells of cold metal and cork lining. It's dark, profoundly dull, except for a tiny, horizontal slit of glass at eye level, giving you a severely limited, letterbox view of the world. You can see the piece of paper on your desk, and that's about it. You are completely, utterly, and claustrophobic ally alone with your thoughts. This was a very real invention, patented in 1925 by a man named Hugo Gernsback. Gernsback was a fascinating character, an inventor, writer, and magazine publisher often called the father of science fiction. He was obsessed with the future and with solving problems through technology, no matter how bizarre the solution might look. And the problem he saw was that the modern world was too distracting. His solution was to physically block it all out. The Isolator was designed with scientific principles in mind, at least as Gernsback saw them. The main body of the helmet was made of wood, lined with sound dampening core, and then covered in a layer of felt. The idea was to eliminate 95% of all outside noise. The tiny I- slits were made of glass, painted black on the inside except for the thin viewing line, to prevent you from being distracted by any movement in your peripheral vision. But here's the wonderfully weird and impractical detail. Gernsback quickly realized his invention had a flaw. Once a user was sealed inside this dark, silent, airtight helmet, they tended to get very sleepy and doze off. To solve this problem of his anti-distraction helmet causing the ultimate distraction of napping, he added a brilliant feature, an oxygen tank. A small pipe was attached to the front of the helmet, which would feed a steady supply of fresh air to the user, supposedly keeping them alert and focused. You can just picture it, an entire office of people, sitting silently at their desks, wearing giant brass helmets, all tethered to their own personal oxygen tanks. It's a scene straight out of one of Gernsback's own science fiction stories. This bizarre contraption is a perfect window into the anxieties of its time. The 1920s saw the rise of scientific management, the idea that every aspect of work could be optimized for maximum efficiency. The office was a new kind of factory, and the worker was a machine that needed to be fine-tuned. The Isolator, in its own strange way, was the ultimate expression of this ethos, a tool to turn a distractible human into a single-asking, hyper-focused productivity machine. But this brings us to a debate that historians and cultural critics still have about Gernstack's creation. What was his real intention? Was this a genuine, good-faith attempt to solve a real-world problem? Gernstack was a serious inventor with many patents to his name. It's entirely possible he truly believed this was the future of focused work, a necessary tool for the modern age. Or was it something else? This is the more tantalizing theory. Gernstack was, after all, a C-5 impresario. He understood narrative, satire, and the power of a striking image. Some scholars argue that the Isolator might have been a piece of brilliant performance art, a satirical commentary on the very dehumanizing trends he was supposedly trying to aid. By creating a device that was so extreme, so absurd, and so visually arresting, was he perhaps holding up a mirror to society and saying, "Look at the ridiculous lengths we're willing to go to in our worship of efficiency"? Was the Isolator a tool? Or was it a critique? A piece of engineering? Or a piece of art? We will likely never know his true motive. But the ambiguity is what makes the object so fascinating. The Isolator, of course, never caught on. It remains a footnote in the history of odd gadgets. But the problem it tried to solve, the war between focus and distraction, between the signal and the noise, has only intensified. And the desire to invent a magic bullet, a perfect technological fix for a messy human problem, is a story that repeats itself again and again. The helmet was a response to the new noises of the office, but the obsession with inventing gadgets to improve the human body had started decades earlier, in the quiet, gas-thick parlors of the Victorian era. The metallic scent of the Isolator helmet fades, and the clatter of the 1922's office is replaced by a different set of sounds: the gentle tick-tock of a grandfather clock, the rustle of a heavy velvet curtain, and the distant clip-clop of a horse-drawn carriage on a cobblestone street. You are in a Victorian parlor, a room crowded with heavy furniture, potted ferns, and 1,000 knick-knacks. This is an era obsessed with progress, with science, and with the new, unsettling idea that the human body is not a fixed, divinely-created thing, but a machine that can be improved, optimized, if you're not careful, broken. You are witnessing the birth of the modern fitness craze. The Industrial Revolution had created a new class of people, the sedentary office worker. For the first time in history, large numbers of men were spending their days sitting at desks, not plowing fields or working at forges. And this new lifestyle created a new set of anxieties. Doctors and social commentators began to warn of the dangers of this unnatural idleness. They warned of neurasthenia, a fashionable nervous disorder, and of dyspepsia, a chronic indigestion blamed on a lack of vigorous activity. The middle-class body was seen as being under siege from the comforts of modern life. The solution, of course, was exercise. But you couldn't just go for a jog in your waistcoat and top hat. You needed a scientific, technological solution. And so, the Victorian era became a golden age for bizarre and wonderfully over-engineered exercise equipment. In the corner of the parlor, you see it. It looks like a cross between a medieval torture device and a piece of factory machinery. It's a contraption of wooden frames, leather straps, pulleys, and iron weights. This is a parlor gymnasium, a home fitness center for the aspiring Victorian gentleman. One of the most famous purveyors of these devices was a Swedish physician named Gustav Sender. He believed that exercise should be precise and scientific, targeting each muscle group with a specific, measured motion. You decide to try one of his inventions, the abdominal kneading machine. Use it on a padded stool and lean back against a series of large, rotating wooden knobs. A helpful assistant turns a crank, and the machine comes to life. The knobs begin to churn and pummel your midsection, mechanically massaging your internal organs. The sensation is deeply strange, a combination of a gentle pummeling and a profound sense of foolishness. This wasn't about building 6-pack ABS. It was about stimulating a sluggish liver and mechanically combating the dreaded dyspepsia. It was internal housekeeping, performed by a machine. Next, you might try a device that looks like a wooden horse, but with springs and levers. This was the chamber horse, designed to simulate the healthy, jostling motion of horseback riding without the inconvenience of owning an actual horse. You sit astride the leather seat and begin to bounce up and down. A series of powerful springs getting you a vigorous, if undignified, workout. It was the Victorian equivalent of a Peloton bike, a status symbol that promised health and vigor through a stationary simulation of an aristocratic pastime. But here's a wonderfully weird and specific detail that captures the spirit of the age. Many of these machines were not just functional. They were designed to be beautiful pieces of furniture. They were often made of polished mahogany, with ornate carvings and brass fittings, designed to blend in with the cluttered decor of the Victorian home. You could have a chest-expanding pulley system disguised as an elegant wardrobe, or a vibrating chair that looked like a throne. It was a world where your workout equipment was also a decorative object, a testament to your commitment to both health and good taste. This explosion of strange fitness gadgets has led to a fascinating historical debate. What was really driving this obsession? The traditional view is that it was a genuine health movement, born out of the real medical concerns of a newly sedentary society. In this interpretation, people like Dr. Sander were pioneers of physiology and preventative medicine, using the best technology of their day to improve public health. The machines, however strange they look to us, were good minus faith attempts to solve real problems. However, a more critical, sociological perspective argues that this was less about health and more about class anxiety and social control. The Victorians were obsessed with self-discipline. A strong, healthy body was a sign of a strong, moral character. Laziness and sickness were seen as moral failings. These exercise machines, in this view, were not just for building muscle. They were for building character. They were tools for the middle class to demonstrate their superiority over the unruly and undisciplined working classes. By engaging in this strange, ritualized form of scientific exercise, a man was proving that he was in control of his body, and therefore fit to be in a position of authority in society. Was it a quest for physical fitness, or a performance of social status? This Victorian belief in the power of a machine to perfect the human body was a powerful one. They had created machines that could spin thread, weave cloth, and power locomotives. It seemed only natural that a machine could also perfect a flabby stomach or a weak constitution. And this faith in mechanical solutions was about to reach its most dramatic and audacious expression, not in the quiet parlor, but in the smoky, grease-stained workshops where inventors were dreaming of a new kind of machine, one powered by the hissing, explosive heart of the industrial age steam. The polite, slightly stuffy atmosphere of the Victorian parlor dissolves into the clang and hiss of a 19th-century workshop. The air here is thick with the smell of coal smoke, hot metal, and machine oil. You are surrounded by a chaotic jumble of lathes, gears, pistons, and half-finished contraptions. This is the engine room of the Industrial Revolution, a place where the impossible was being made real every single day. And the god of this new world, the force that powered its dreams, was steam. Steam had already conquered the world. It powered the factories that clothed the nation, the trains that crisscrossed the continent, and the ships that ruled the waves. To the Victorian mind, steam was a source of almost limitless, miraculous power. And if steam could do all that, what else might it be capable of? This question sparked a fever dream of invention, a period of wild, unbridled, and often deeply unscientific speculation. You have arrived in the golden age of the steam-powered folly. You see an inventor sketching furiously at a workbench. He is not designing a new locomotive or a more efficient pump. He is designing a steam-powered man. In the 1862, a Canadian inventor named George Moore patented a design for a steam man, an 8-foot-tall automaton that would walk, pull a carriage, and, for some reason, smoke a cigar. It was to be powered by a small steam boiler mounted on its back. The idea captured the public imagination. Several working models were actually built, including one by a man named Daniel Gunno in Ohio, which reportedly could walk at a steady 5 miles an hour, its metal feet clanking on the road, steam billowing from its torso. You can almost picture the scene, a terrifying, headless iron giant, puffing and hissing its way down a country lane, terrifying horses and scattering chickens. It was a solution in search of a problem. Why build a clumsy, walking steam man when a simple steam carriage with wheels would be infinitely more efficient? The answer is that it wasn't about efficiency. It was about the sheer, glorious spectacle of it all. It was about recreating the human form in iron and power, a mechanical golem for the industrial age. But the ambition didn't stop at walking. If steam could conquer the land and the sea, its ultimate destiny was to conquer the air. You move to another part of the workshop, where a different kind of inventor is at work. He is surrounded by drawings of wings, propellers, and lightweight boilers. This is the era of the aeronautical steam carriage. One of the most famous and ambitious of these was the Ariel, designed in the 1842 by two British inventors, William Henson and John Stringfellow. They didn't just design a machine. They launched a full minor-scale media campaign. They produced beautiful, dramatic lithographs showing their magnificent creation soaring gracefully over the pyramids of Egypt and the pagodas of China. The Ariel was a vast monoplane with a 150-foot wingspan, powered by a custom-built, lightweight 25-horsepower steam engine driving two enormous 6-bladed propellers. The public went wild. You could buy prints of the Ariel to hang in your home. You could even buy shares in their aerial transit company, which promised regular passenger service to destinations around the globe. There was only one problem: the machine never actually flew. They built a large scale model, but it was too heavy and underpowered to do more than briefly hop off its guide wire. And here we come to a wonderfully specific and quixotic detail of this quest. The central challenge for any steam-powered aircraft was the power to weight ratio. A conventional steam engine was far too heavy to ever get off the ground. This led inventors down some truly bizarre rabbit holes. One French inventor in the 1872 proposed a flying machine powered, not by a boiler, but by a series of small, gunpowder-fueled explosions. Essentially a steam engine that ran on a machine gun's principle. Another designed a steam aerocycle, a kind of one-man helicopter with a boiler strapped to the pilot's back. These weren't just drawings. They were serious proposals from respected engineers, a testament to the feverish, almost desperate, belief that steam must be the answer to flight. This entire chapter of failed steam-powered inventions has led to a fascinating historical debate. How should we view these inventors? Were they brilliant, unsung pioneers, heroic visionaries who were simply born 100 years too early? In this view, men like Henson and Stringfellow were geniuses who correctly identified all the key components of a modern airplane: the monoplane wing, the propellers, the tail for stability. They were only defeated by the limitations of the power source available to them. They were the Leonardo da Vinci's of the steam age, their dreams just waiting for the internal combustion engine to make them a reality. Or were they something else? A more skeptical view argues that many of these inventors were closer to showmen and stock market promoters than they were to serious scientists. They were masters of hype, selling a romantic and exciting vision to a gullible public. The beautiful prints of the Ariel flying over the pyramids weren't a blueprint. They were an advertisement. In this interpretation, the failure to fly was almost irrelevant. The goal was to capture the public's imagination and, more importantly, its investment capital. Were they pioneers of aviation, or were they pioneers of crowdfunding? Ultimately, steam was a dead end for aviation. The future belonged to a different kind of power, but the dream of creating a mechanical man, a machine that could replicate the most fundamental of human actions, did not die with the steam man. The ambition simply shifted from the power source to the mechanics of motion itself. The next great obsession would be to create a machine that could do one simple thing: walk. The hiss of a steam engine fades, and the grand, impossible dream of a steam-powered airplane gives way to a more grounded, but no less strange, ambition. You are still in the late 19th century, a world mesmerized by the power of the machine. The steam man had proven to be a clanking, inefficient dead end, But the dream of creating an artificial man, or at least artificial legs, persisted. The challenge now was purely mechanical. How do you replicate the subtle, complex, and beautiful motion of a human or animal walking, using only gears, cranks, and levers? You find yourself in a dusty patent office, surrounded by shells groaning under the weight of thousands of rejected dreams. And here, you discover an entire sub-minus genre of invention dedicated to the walking machine. These were not robots in the modern sense. They had no brains. They were purely mechanical contraptions, designed to be pulled by a horse or powered by a man turning a crane, that would walk across the ground on a set of articulated legs instead of rolling on wheels. But why go to all the trouble of building a complex, fragile set of mechanical legs when a simple wheel is infinitely more efficient on a flat surface? The answer lies in the state of the roads. In the 19th century, outside of the major cities, most roads were little more than muddy, rutted tracks. A wheeled vehicle could easily get bogged down in the mud or stuck in a ditch. The inventors of the walking machine believed they had the solution. A machine with legs, they argued, could walk over obstacles, navigate off terrain, and pull a plow through a muddy field with the sure-footedness of a horse. They were trying to build a mechanical horse, a tireless beast of burden for the farm and the frontier. One of the most remarkable of these creations was the mechanical horse patented in 1893 by a professor from Iowa named J. W. Trogdon. His design was a masterpiece of Victorian mechanical complexity. It was a metal horse with jointed legs, connected through an intricate system of cranks and levers to a central driver shaft. When a real horse pulled it, or a man turned a crank, the mechanical horse would begin to walk, its legs moving in a carefully synchronized gait. Professor Trogdon's patent application is filled with beautiful, detailed drawings showing the precise arrangement of every single gear and rod, a testament to a mind obsessed with the pure geometry of motion. But you don't have to imagine it from the drawings. You find yourself in a field, watching a real minus-life demonstration of another, even more famous, walking machine, the electric walking doll created by the Canadian minus American inventor Charles A. Taylor in the early 1900 seconds. It wasn't a doll in the modern sense. It was a 6-foot- tall mechanical man, powered by an electric motor. Its sole purpose was to serve as a walking advertisement. It would be placed outside a store, and when switched on, it would begin to walk endlessly in a circle, its metal feet imping on the pavement, drawing a crowd of astonished onlookers. It was clumsy, it was noisy, but it was a walking spectacle, a testament to the fact that, with enough ingenuity, you could make a machine walk. And here we find a wonderfully weird and niche detail. The obsession with mechanical legs wasn't just for land. Some inventors tried to apply the same principle to water. There were numerous patents filed for aquatic propellers that consisted of a set of mechanical duck feet or fishtails that would paddle a boat through the water. The logic was the same. Why use a simple, rotating propeller when you could have a far more complex and natural paddling mechanism? None of them, of course, ever proved to be more efficient than a simple oar-screw propeller. This entire chapter of failed walking machines has sparked a debate among historians of technology. How should we see these strange, clunky contraptions? Were they a complete and total dead end? A misguided obsession that contributed nothing to the future of engineering? This is the traditional view. It sees these machines as curiosities, the product of eccentric basement inventors who fundamentally misunderstood the elegant efficiency of the wheel. They were a footnote, a comical failure in the grand story of technological progress. However, a more recent interpretation offers a different perspective. It argues that these walking machines, while failures as practical vehicles, were an incredibly important intellectual exercise. They were the first serious attempts to analyze and replicate biological locomotion. The inventors who struggled with the complex geometry of a walking leg were, in a way, the pioneers of robotics and biomechanics. Their intricate drawings of gears and levers were a form of reverse-minus engineering, an attempt to understand the machine of the animal body. The problems they tried to solve: balance, gait, Coordination are the very same problems that robotics engineers at places like Boston Dynamics are still grappling with today, albeit with the help of sophisticated computers and sensors. In this view, the steam man and the mechanical horse were not just failures. They were the great minus grandfathers of the modern robot. They were the first clumsy steps on a very long road. The walking machines eventually clanked their way into the scrap heap of history, replaced by the unstoppable rise of the wheeled automobile. But the spirit of inventing complex, mechanical solutions for everyday problems was still very much alive. The next great wave of invention would focus not on how to move our bodies, but on how to project our voices across vast distances, and how to deal with the frustrating new problems that this magical technology created. The clanking, metallic footsteps of the walking machine fade away, replaced by a sound that is both miraculous and intensely annoying, the sound of an early telephone call. You have moved forward in time to the turn of the 20th century. The telephone, once a scientific curiosity, is now starting to weave its way into the fabric of daily life, and it is a deeply imperfect technology. Imagine you are sitting in a well -to-do home in the early 1900s, and the wall is a beautiful oak box with a small mouthpiece sticking out of the front and a receiver hanging on a hook on the side. You turn a crank to signal the operator, who then connects you to your desired party, and then the struggle begins. The line is a blizzard of static, crackles, and hum. The voice on the other end is faint, tiny, and distant, like a ghost whispering from the bottom of a well. You find yourself shouting into the mouthpiece, "Can you hear me now? Speak up. What was that?" It is a technology that promises instant connection, but delivers constant frustration. The problem was amplification. The electrical signal generated by a human voice was incredibly weak, and as it traveled down miles of unshielded iron or copper wire, it degraded rapidly. For a local call, it was just about manageable. For a long distance call, it was nearly impossible. The entire country was being wired together, but no one could hear each other. This was the great technological challenge of the age, and in the years before the invention of the vacuum tube amplifier in the 1910s, this problem gave rise to a whole ecosystem of bizarre and ingenious gadgets designed to boost the feeble voice of the telephone. You are now in the office of a businessman who has just purchased the latest in telephonic enhancement technology. On his desk, next to the telephone, is a large, ornate, trumpet-shaped horn, much like the horn on an early gramophone. This is a purely mechanical amplifier. The idea was simple. You would place the telephone receiver at the narrow end of the horn, and the horn's conical shape would acoustically amplify the sound, making the distant voice louder. It was a crude but somewhat effective solution, turning the telephone into a kind of stationary megaphone. But the real ingenuity was happening on the transmission side. Inventors realized that the carbon microphone in the telephone's mouthpiece was the weakling, so they tried to improve it with mechanical brute force. You see a device called the Hundingscone-Decker transmitter. It looks like a normal telephone mouthpiece, but it's much larger and heavier. Inside, instead of a simple diaphragm, it has a complex system of multiple electrodes and a large mass of loosely packed carbon granules. The idea was that this bigger, more complex arrangement would be more sensitive and produce a stronger electrical signal. It was a more is more approach to engineering. And here we come to the truly weird and wonderful fringe of this inventive craze. One inventor, convinced that the problem was the weakness of the human voice itself, bypassed it altogether. He patented a telephone repeater that was essentially a mechanical parrot. It used a phonograph to record the incoming message onto a wax cylinder. Then, a powerful, clockwork-driven playback mechanism would speak the recorded message into a second outgoing telephone line with much greater volume. It was an absurdly complex, Rube Goldberg-esque solution to a simple amplification problem. This entire era of pre-electronic amplification has sparked a historical debate about the nature of invention. For a long time, the story of the telephone was told as a simple, linear progression. Bell invents the telephone, the vacuum tube is invented, and then clear, global communication becomes possible. The bizarre, Mechanical amplifiers of the interim period were seen as a quirky but ultimately insignificant footnote, a dark age of telephone technology. However, a new generation of historians of technology argues that this view misses the point entirely. They contend that this period of failed inventions was actually a crucial and incredibly fertile period of experimentation. It was a time when thousands of inventors, with no established theory of electronics to guide them, were trying everything they could think of. They were exploring the boundaries of mechanics, acoustics, and material science. This chaotic, trial minus and minus error process, they argue, is how innovation often works. It's not a straight line, but a messy, branching tree with many dead ends. The knowledge gained from these failures, understanding what didn't work and why, was essential for the later successes. The mechanical parrot, as silly as it sounds, was a vital part of the journey to the modern digital network. Was this period a technological dead end, or was it the primordial soup from which modern electronics emerged? The problem of amplification would eventually be solved, not by bigger horns or more complex microphones, but by the elegant, invisible power of the vacuum tube. The crackle of the early telephone fades, and you feel yourself being pulled much further back in time. Long before the age of electricity, long before the age of steam, you are traveling back to the Renaissance, to the sun-drenched hills of Florence. Here, the greatest universal genius of his age is sketching in a secret notebook, dreaming not of how to amplify the human voice, but of how to give the human body the one thing it has always craved, the power of flight. The crackling hum of the early telephone line fades into the sounds of a Renaissance workshop. You hear the gentle scratching of a quill pen on paper, the tap of a sculptor's hammer on marble, and the distant ringing of church bells across the city of Florence. You are in the late 15th century, a time of explosive creativity, intellectual curiosity, and boundless optimism, and you are in the presence of the ultimate Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci. You are his apprentice, and you have been granted a rare privilege. He has opened one of his private notebooks for you. It's not a formal treatise, but a chaotic, swirling vortex of ideas. The pages are filled with mere manuscript writing that you have to hold up to a looking glass to read, interspersed with some of the most beautiful and brilliant technical drawings ever created. You see sketches of gears, war machines, anatomical studies of human muscles, and complex geometrical diagrams, but the pages you are drawn to, the ones filled with the most obsessive and fantastical energy, are the ones dedicated to a single, audacious dream: human flight. Leonardo was obsessed with the idea of flying. He saw it not as a fantasy, but as a mechanical problem to be solved, and for him, the solution was all around him, in the flapping wings of the birds that soared over the Florentine rooftops. He believed that if he could just understand the mechanics of a bird's wing, he could replicate it for a man. This led him to design a whole series of what are known as ornithopterrestrial flying machines that generate lift by flapping their wings like a bird. You gaze at one of his most famous designs. It's a machine built for a single pilot who would lie face down on a wooden plate. His arms would turn a crank, which, through an intricate system of pulleys and rods, would power to enormous, bat-like wings. His feet would operate pedals connected to the tail, allowing him to steer. The wings are not simple, flat surfaces. They are complex, articulated structures, designed to twist and change shape on the downstroke and upstroke, just as Leonardo observed in his detailed studies of bird anatomy. It is a masterpiece of mechanical ingenuity and biological observation, a perfect fusion of his skills as both an artist and an engineer. You can almost feel Leonardo's excitement. You can picture him taking you to the top of a hill overlooking the city, ready to launch his magnificent creation. He believes he has cracked the code of nature, that he is about to usher in a new age of human possibility. But then, you look closer at the designs, and you see the wonderfully weird and impractical details that reveal the limitations of his world. In one design for a flying machine, Leonardo includes a landing gear. It's not wheels, it's a set of two giant, retractable ladders that would be lowered just before landing, allowing the pilot to, in theory, scramble down to safety. It's a clumsy, almost comical solution to a problem he clearly hadn't fully thought through. In another sketch, for a kind of proto-minus helicopter he called the aerial screw, he suggests that the corkscrew-minus-shaped blade should be made of starched linen. It's a material that would have been hopelessly flimsy and incapable of generating the necessary lift. These details show that while Leonardo's imagination was soaring, his knowledge of materials science and aerodynamics was still firmly rooted in the 15th century. He was a genius, but he was also a man of his time. This has led to a major, long-running debate among historians and engineers. Were Leonardo's flying machines ever actually buildable or flyable? For centuries, the consensus was no. They were seen as brilliant but ultimately fantastical thought experiments. They were beautiful drawings, but they were not viable engineering blueprints. Scholars argued that they were too heavy, too complex, and that a human being could never generate enough power to lift such a machine off the ground. However, in recent years, this view has been challenged. A number of modern engineers and enthusiasts have built working replicas of Leonardo's designs, using the same materials that would have been available to him, like wood, linen, and leather. In 2003, a British hang-glider pilot built a full-scale model of one of Leonardo's gliders, a design without flapping wings, and successfully flew it. In 2010, a team of engineers in Canada built a working, human-powered ornithopter based on Leonardo's principles and managed to sustain flight for almost 20 seconds. These experiments have proven that, at least in principle, some of Leonardo's ideas were aerodynamically sound. This has led to a ray-minus evaluation of his work. The new argument is that Leonardo was not just a dreamer. He was a true pioneer of aviation. He was the first person to conduct a truly scientific study of flight, and whose designs were not fantasies, but serious, workable prototypes. The reason he never succeeded, this view contends, was not because his designs were flawed, but because he lacked a light and powerful enough engine, a problem that would not be solved for another 400 years. Was he a brilliant but impractical dreamer, or was he a true engineer, defeated only by the technological limitations of his era? The answer is probably a bit of both. He was a man whose mind could see the future, but whose hands were stuck in the present, and the central flaw in his most ambitious designs was not a lack of ingenuity, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the physics of flight, a misunderstanding born from his deep, and ultimately misleading, love for the birds. You are still in Leonardo's workshop, the scent of linseed, oil and old paper in the air. The beautiful, intricate drawings of his flying machines are spread out before you. They are a testament to his genius for observation and mechanical design. But, as you study them, a fundamental question begins to dawn on you, a question that Leonardo himself, for all his brilliance, never seemed to ask. What if a bird is the wrong model? Leonardo, like so many other early flight pioneers, was trapped by a powerful and logical, but ultimately incorrect, assumption. He saw that birds flew by flapping their wings. Therefore, he concluded, a man-made flying machine must also fly by flapping its wings. His entire research program was dedicated to replicating the flapping motion of a bird. He spent countless hours dissecting birds, studying the structure of their bones and the arrangement of their flight muscles, all in an attempt to build a better mechanical wing. But in doing so, he missed the two crucial secrets of flight that birds embodied, but did not explicitly reveal. The first was the concept of the airfoil. A bird's wing is not just a flat paddle that pushes down on the air. It is a curved surface, and airfoil, as it moves through the air traveling over the curved top surface has to travel a longer distance, and therefore moves faster than the air moving under the flatter bottom surface, according to a principle of fluid dynamics later described by Daniel Bernoulli. This difference in speed creates a difference in pressure. The faster moving air on top exerts less pressure than the slower moving air on the bottom. The result is an upward force, a gentle, constant push that we call lift. A bird generates lift simply by having a wing of the right shape and moving it forward through the air. The flapping is primarily for thrust, to provide that forward motion. Leonardo never fully grasped this. He saw the flapping, but he didn't see the lift being generated by the shape of the wing itself. His designs focused on the power of the downstroke, on the brute force of pushing the air down, rather than on the elegant, passive lift generated by a curved wing moving at speed. This is why a modern airplane, with its fixed, curved wings, can glide so effortlessly, while Leonardo's ornithopteros were doomed to be incredibly inefficient, energy-hungry machines. The second, and more fundamental, problem was one of simple physics, the square minus cube law. This is a mathematical principle that describes the relationship between the size, surface area, and volume of an object. As an object gets bigger, its volume and therefore its weight increases by the cube of its size, while its surface area only increases by the square. Let's think about this in terms of a bird and a man. Imagine a small bird, like a sparrow. It has a certain amount of muscle power relative to its body weight, and a certain wing area relative to that weight. Now, let's say you want to scale that bird up to the size of a man. If you make the bird 10 times taller, its wing area will be 100 times greater 10 squared, but its weight will be 1,0 times greater 10 cubed. The scaled minus up bird would be incredibly heavy, but its wings would be far too small and its muscles far too weak to lift its own enormous weight. This is the mathematical trap that Leonardo fell into. He assumed that a man, with his powerful leg and arm muscles, could power a set of proportionally larger wings. But the square minus cube law dictates that this is impossible. A man is simply too heavy and not powerful enough for his size to fly like a bird, no matter how brilliantly designed his flapping mechanism was. A human minus powered ornithopter was, and is, a physical impossibility. Nature had found a perfect, efficient size for a flapping minus wing creature, and a 6 minus foot minus tall human was not it. This inherent physical doom of Leonardo's designs has led to a fascinating debate among historians of science. Why did a genius like Leonardo, a man who seemed to understand so much about anatomy and mechanics, fail to grasp these fundamental principles? One school of thought argues that it was simply a lack of the necessary scientific framework. The principles of aerodynamics and the square minus cube law had not yet been formally articulated. Leonardo was working at the absolute limit of the knowledge of his time. He was a brilliant observer, but he was observing a phenomenon whose underlying physics was still a complete mystery. He couldn't have known what he didn't know. But another, more psychological interpretation suggests that Leonardo's failure was a product of his greatest strength, his artistic eye. He was so captivated by the beauty and elegance of a bird's flight that he was, in a sense, intellectually blinded by it. He was so in love with the idea of replicating nature that he was unable to think beyond it. The true path to flight, as later pioneers like the Wright brothers would discover, was not to copy the bird, but to understand the abstract principles of lift and thrust and then design a new kind of machine, the fixed minus wing airplane, that was uniquely suited to the scale and power of a human endeavor. Leonardo, the ultimate artist of nature, was perhaps too close to his subject to see the more abstract, and ultimately more successful, path. Leonardo's dream of a flying machine would have to wait for centuries, for a new engine and a new understanding of physics. But the desire to create machines that could perform miraculous, almost human minus-like tasks was not unique to the Renaissance. We now travel even further back, to a world of marble temples and toga-minus-clad philosophers, to ancient Greece, where another kind of genius was using his knowledge of mechanics to build a machine that could perform a task so mundane. You would never expect to find it in the ancient world. The scent of oil paint and old parchment from Leonardo's studio vanishes, replaced by the warm, dusty air of the Mediterranean. You can smell the sea, the dry herbs on the hillsides, and the faint, sweet smell of incense wafting from a nearby temple. You have traveled back more than 500 years before Leonardo, to the 1st century CE. You are in the city of Alexandria in Egypt, which at this time is the intellectual capital of the Greco-Roman world, home to the great library and a hotbed of scientific and engineering innovation. And you are about to use the world's first vending machine. You approach the entrance of a small temple. Like any good worshipper, you know that you are supposed to ritually cleanse your hands with holy water before entering. But there is no priest here to dispense it. Instead, you see a sturdy minus-looking urn, a sealed vase with a small slot near the top and a spout near the bottom. This is the invention of a man named Hero of Alexandria, one of the most brilliant mathematicians and engineers of the ancient world. Following the instructions, you take a bronze coin from your purse and drop it into the slot. You hear a clink, a brief, internal whirring sound, and then, for a few seconds, a small amount of holy water flows from the spout into a basin below, just enough for you to wash your hands. You have just witnessed a miracle of mechanics. So how did it work? Hero himself described the mechanism in his book, Automata. The design was simple, but absolutely ingenious. The coin, when dropped into the machine, would fall onto a small pan attached to one end of a lever. The weight of the coin would cause the lever to tip down. The other end of the lever was connected to a plug that sealed the water spout. As the lever tipped, it would lift the plug, opening the spout and allowing the water to flow out. But the pan the coin sat on was tilted. After a few seconds, the coin would slide off the pan. The lever would tip back to its original position. The plug would fall back into place, and the flow of water would stop. It was a perfectly self-regulating, automated system. This was just a clever toy. It solved a very real problem for the temple priests. Before Hero's invention, worshippers were supposed to leave a donation for the holy water they took. But people are people. Some would take the water and forget to leave a coin. Others would leave a coin but take far more than their fair share of the precious water. Hero's machine eliminated both problems. It ensured that everyone who took water paid for it, and it dispensed a standard, measured amount every single time. It was a brilliant solution for automating piety and preventing holy water theft. But Hero's genius didn't stop at vending machines. He was obsessed with using the principles of mechanics, pneumatics the science of air and pressure, and hydraulics to create what he called automata moving machines that seemed to possess a life of their own. He was the Walt Disney of the ancient world, creating mechanical wonders to amaze and delight. You find yourself in the workshop of one of his followers. You see a design for a set of temple doors that would open automatically. The mechanism was incredible. The priest would light a fire on an altar outside the temple. The heat from the fire would expand the air inside, a sealed chamber beneath the altar. This expanding air would push water from one container to another. The weight of the water in the second container would then, through an intricate system of ropes and pulleys, pull the massive temple doors open, as if by divine intervention. When the fire was extinguished, the air would cool and contract, siphoning the water back to its original container, and the doors would swing shut. Imagine the awe of the average worshipper, seeing the temple doors swing open on their own as the sacred fire was lit. It was engineering as magic. And here's a wonderfully weird and specific example of his work. Hero also designed a programmable robot. It was a small, 3-wheeled cart that could be set to follow a specific path. The program was a complex arrangement of ropes wound around 2 axles. By changing how the ropes were wound, an engineer could make the cart move forward, backward, turn left, turn right, and even follow a complex, pre-determined route around the room. It was the world's first, albeit very simple, autonomous vehicle. This has led to a fascinating historical debate about the nature of Greek science and technology. Why didn't all this incredible ingenuity lead to an industrial revolution in the ancient world? Hero and his colleagues clearly understood the principles of steam power. He invented a device called an AOI pile, a steam-powered spinning sphere. Mechanics and automation. They had all the basic ingredients. So why did they use their genius to build magical toys and temple tricks, instead of steam engines on factories? One theory is economic. The Greco-Roman world was a slave-based economy. There was a vast supply of cheap human labor. Therefore, There was no real economic incentive to invent labor minus saving machinery. Why build a complex, expensive steam engine to do a job when you could just have a dozen slaves do it for free? In this view, the brilliant minds of Alexandria focused on frivolous things like automatic doors because there was no market for industrial technology. But another, more cultural theory argues that it was about mindset. The Greek intellectual elite, particularly the philosophers, held a deep disdain for manual labor and commercial enterprise. The highest calling was the pursuit of abstract knowledge and philosophy. Engineering and mechanics were seen as a lower minus class, practical craft, not a noble intellectual pursuit. So while a genius like Hero might tinker with these devices, the wider intellectual culture never saw them as something to be systematically developed for industrial purposes. They were clever novelties, not the foundations of a new economy. Was the lack of a Greek industrial revolution an economic issue or a cultural one? Whatever the reason, the incredible inventions of Hero of Alexandria were largely forgotten for over 1,000 years. But the idea of using the forces of nature to create complex, time-keeping machines would emerge in a very different context. Not for dispensing holy water, but for calling monks to prayer in the cold, dark holes of medieval monasteries. The warm, bustling intellectual air of Alexandria gives way to a profound and disciplined quiet. You find yourself in the cool, stone cloister of a medieval European monastery. The year is somewhere around 1100 CE. Life here is governed not by the sun or the seasons, but by a strict, unyielding timetable of prayer. The Benedictine rule, which governed many monasteries, prescribed 7 specific times for daily prayer, from the pre-dawn matins to the final compline after sunset. But this created a very practical problem. In an age before clocks were common, how do you make sure that all the monks wake up for prayer at 2 a.m., especially on a cloudy, moonless night? The survival of the entire monastic community, both spiritually and practically, depended on punctuality, and this desperate need for a reliable timekeeper, a machine that could conquer the darkness and the unreliability of the sun, made the medieval monastery an unlikely and accidental hotbed of technological innovation. You are about to witness the slow, complicated birth of the modern clock. For centuries, the primary tool for this was the water clock, or clepstia. This was a technology inherited from the ancient world, but medieval monks refined it to new levels of complexity. You see one in the corner of the cloister. It's a large, calibrated vessel of water, with a small hole at the bottom allowing the water to drip out at a slow, steady rate. As the water level drops, it indicates the passing of the hours. But the monks weren't content with just a simple dripping pot. They began to add features. You see a water clock where the dropping water level lowers a float. This float is attached by a rope to a pointer that moves across a dial, creating a recognizable clock face. Another, more advanced model uses the dripping water to turn a small water wheel, which is then connected through a series of gears to ring a bell at a specific time. This was the first alarm clock, a machine designed to rouse a designated monk, the waker, whose job it was to then go and manually wake all the other monks for their pre-dawn prayers. And here we find a wonderfully weird and specific problem that these water-clock engineers had to solve winter. In the cold stone monasteries of northern Europe, water has a very inconvenient habit of freezing. A frozen water clock is not very useful. This led to some truly ingenious, strange workarounds. Some monasteries built their water clocks near the kitchens to keep them from freezing. Others, according to some historical texts, resorted to using other liquids that had a lower freezing point, with some scholars suggesting they may have even built clocks that ran on beer or wine, though the evidence for this is highly debated and perhaps a bit wishful. This reliance on water clocks, with their inherent inaccuracies and freezing problems, has led to a major historical debate. Just how important were these early monastic timekeepers to the great technological leap that came next the invention of the mechanical clock? The traditional view is that the mechanical clock, which appeared in the late 13th century, was a revolutionary, game-changing invention that came out of nowhere. It was based on a completely new principle, a weight-driven escapement mechanism, a complex dance of gears and catches that controlled the release of energy at a steady, predictable rate. In this view, the water clock was a primitive and irrelevant dead end. The mechanical clock was a true eureka moment, the birth of modern machinery. However, a more recent school of thought, championed by historians of technology, argues for a much more gradual evolution. They contend that the mechanical clock was not an invention, but a synthesis. It was born directly out of the generations of experience that monastic craftsmen had gained from building complex, tiered water clocks. The monks already knew how to build gears to doctor dials and ring bells. The only thing they were missing was a more reliable power source than a dripping bucket of water. The invention of the verge escapement wasn't a revolution that replaced the water clock. It was a clever new module that could be plugged into the existing system. In this view, the water clock wasn't a dead end. It was the essential training ground, the technological cradle where the skills necessary for the mechanical age were nurtured. Was the mechanical clock a revolution or an evolution? You move forward in time a couple of centuries. You are now standing at the base of a great cathedral in a bustling medieval city. A massive, new mechanical clock has been installed in its tower. It doesn't just tell the time. This is an astronomical clock, a masterpiece of public technology. As the hour strikes, a set of mechanical apostles parades out of a doorway. A rooster flaps its wings and crows, and the figure of death tolls a bell. It is a piece of public theater, a complex automaton designed to inspire awe and remind the citizens of their mortality and the divine order of the universe. The clock is no longer just a tool for waking monks. It has become a symbol of civic pride and power. The ability to build and maintain such a complex machine was a statement. It said that this city was prosperous, it was orderly, and it was at the cutting edge of technology. The quiet, inward-looking time of the monastery had become the loud, public, and precisely measured time of the modern city. The world would never be the same. The gentle drip of the water clock had given way to the relentless, precise, and inescapable ticking of the mechanical age. And this new age of machinery and precision would soon turn its attention to a much more violent problem: how to protect the fragile human body from a new and terrifying threat on the battlefield. The rhythmic, reassuring tick-tock of the great cathedral clock fades away, replaced by the deafening, chaotic roar of artillery and the chatter of machine-gunfire. You have leapt forward to the early 20th century, and you find yourself in the muddy, terrifying landscape of a World War I battlefield. The age of chivalry, of knights in shining armor, is long gone. The nature of warfare has been utterly transformed by the products of the industrial age. A single machine gun can now cut down hundreds of men in minutes. The human body, soft and fragile, is hopelessly outmatched by the new technologies of death. In the trenches, soldiers are desperate for any kind of protection. The standard -issue steel helmet offers some defense against shrapnel, but it does nothing to protect the torso or limbs. This desperate need for better personal protection sparked a new wave of invention, a frantic and often misguided attempt to resurrect the medieval knight and create a bulletproof soldier for the 20th century. You are about to witness the strange and ill-fated rebirth of personal armor. You see a soldier preparing to go over the top, but he is not just wearing his standard uniform. He is being strapped into a bizarre and cumbersome contraption. It is a suit of body armor, but it looks less like a sleek, modern piece of kit and more like something cobbled together in a blacksmith shop. This is the Brewster body shield, one of the most famous and most bizarre of the World War I armor designs. Patented by Tortoises Brewster from New Jersey. It was essentially a helmet and a breastplate forged from thick chrome nickel steel. The helmet was a massive, pointed thing with a tiny I-slit, making the wearer look like a bizarre, cyclopean knight. The breastplate was a heavy, curved plate that covered the entire torso. The whole ensemble weighed a crushing 40 pounds. Dr. Brewster was so confident in his invention that he staged a public demonstration, allowing a strong man to hit him with a sledgehammer while he wore the suit. He even had men shoot at him with low-caliber rifles to prove it could stop a bullet. And it could. It was, technically, bulletproof. There was just one problem. It was also almost completely immobilizing. A soldier wearing the Brewster body shield could barely move, let alone run, crawl, or fight effectively in the chaos of a trench assault. It was a perfect example of an invention that solved one problem, stopping bullets, while creating a dozen others: exhaustion, lack of mobility, zero peripheral vision. It was a technological success but a practical failure. That the Brewster shield was just one of many. You see a collection of other strange and hopeful designs. There's the Dayfield body shield, which consisted of a series of interlocking steel plates, like the shell of an armadillo, designed to be more flexible. There's the Italian Farina armor, a more traditional minus-looking suit with plates covering the shoulders and upper legs. The British Army even experimented with a silk minus-based body armor, a form of soft armor made from multiple layers of silk fabric, based on the principle that the strong, flexible fibers could catch a slow minus-moving bullet. And here you find a wonderfully weird and specific detail: the human shield concept. One inventor, reasoning that a single soldier couldn't carry enough armor to protect himself, designed a massive, wheeled steel shield that a team of soldiers would push in front of them as they advanced across no man's land. It was essentially a mobile, rolling wall, a kind of battlefield snowplow, complete with loopholes for the men to shoot through. It was a clumsy, heavy, and incredibly vulnerable target for enemy artillery. Another testament to the desperate, out minus of minus, the minus box thinking of the era. This whole chapter of failed World War I body armor has led to a historical debate. Why did none of these inventions catch on? Why did the armies of the world, despite the horrific casualty rates, largely reject the idea of personal body armor for their infantrymen? The traditional military view is that it was a simple matter of practicality. As we saw with the Brewster shield, the armor of the day was simply too heavy and cumbersome. In the dynamic, fluid environment of the battlefield, mobility was life. An encumbered soldier was a dead soldier. The military leadership concluded that the trade minus-off wasn't worth it. It was better to have a fast minus-moving, agile soldier with minimal protection than a slow minus-moving, bulletproof target. However, a more recent, cultural interpretation suggests there was a deeper, more psychological reason. The military ethos of the time, particularly among the officer class, was still deeply rooted in 19th century ideas of courage, heroism, and the offensive spirit. There was a deep minus-seated, almost romantic, belief that a brave soldier overcame the enemy with courage and cold steel, not by cowering behind a plate of armor. Armor was seen as defensive, as cowardly, as a sign of weakness. A general famously remarked that body armor would spoil the spirit of the bayonet. In this view, the rejection of body armor was not just a practical decision, it was an ideological one. It was a tragic, and ultimately fatal, clash between the romantic ideals of the old world and the brutal, industrial reality of the new. The dream of a bulletproof soldier would have to wait for the invention of new, lightweight materials like Kevlar half a century later. The roar of the battlefield fades, but the desire to use technology to enhance the human experience, to bring the world closer, was about to take a new, and much more portable, direction. You are heading to the bustling city streets of the 1930s, where a new kind of gadget is promising to put the entire world of entertainment right inside your head. The chaotic roar of the battlefield fades into the upbeat, optimistic sound of a city in the end-war years. You hear the rumble of streetcars, the honking of Ford Model A horns, and the distant sound of a jazz band playing in a dance hall. You are on a bustling city street in the 1930s, a world caught between the lingering memory of one great war and the growing shadow of another. It's an age of glamour, of Art Deco skyscrapers, and of a revolutionary new form of mass media, the radio. For the first time in history, millions of people could listen to the same news broadcast, the same baseball game, the same swing music, all at the same time. The radio was a magical box that brought the entire world into the family living room. It was the centerpiece of the home, the large, stationary piece of wooden furniture, But what if you wanted to listen to the radio while you were out for a walk? What if you wanted your own personal, mobile soundtrack to your life? This desire for portable entertainment, an idea we take completely for granted today, was the driving force behind one of the most charmingly absurd gadgets of the era, the radio hat. You see a young man strolling down the sidewalk, looking very dapper in his suit and tie, but there is something unusual about his hat. It's a straw boater, a popular style for the summer, but sticking straight up from the top is a large, circular metal loop, a radio antenna. A pair of wires runs down from the hat to a set of bulky headphones clamped over his ears. He is listening to the radio. Live, as he walks, he is a man from the future. The walking, one-man entertainment system. This was a real, commercially available product. One of the most famous examples was the Man from Mars radio hat, introduced in 1949. But the idea had been floating around in hobbyist magazines for decades before that. It was a masterpiece of miniature, if primitive, electronics. The hat itself contained a simple crystal radio circuit with a tuner and a detector. The large loop antenna was necessary to capture the faint AM radio signals. It was a completely self-contained, wearable radio. It had its limitations. Of course, crystal radios are passive receivers. They don't have an amplifier, so they require no batteries or power source. But this also means they can only drive a high impedance earpiece, and the volume is often very low, and your reception depended entirely on how close you were to a powerful radio transmitter. It was a finicky, low-fidelity experience, but it was also, for its time, pure magic. And here you find a wonderfully strange detail that reveals the social dynamics of this new technology. The radio hat was almost exclusively marketed to unworn by men. The ad showed dapper gentlemen listening to sports games while walking the dog or commuting to work. But what about women? For them, inventors came up with a different, but equally strange, solution: the radio parasol. It was a fashionable ladies' umbrella with the antenna and radio components built into the frame. It was a clear example of gendered design, a world where a man's gadget was a practical hat, and a woman's was an elegant accessory. This entire fad of wearable radios has sparked a debate among historians of media and technology. What did these strange gadgets really represent? Or were they just a silly, short-lived novelty? A comical dead end on the path to the Sony Walkman and the iPod. This is the conventional view. It sees the radio hat as a gimmick, a fun but ultimately impractical curiosity with no lasting impact. However, a more forward-looking interpretation sees the radio hat as something much more significant. It argues that the radio hat and other early portable radio concepts represent the very first glimmer of a profound social and technological shift. It was the moment when electronic media first untethered itself from the home and attached itself to the individual. The person wearing a radio hat was making a radical statement. They were creating a private, invisible bubble of sound around themselves in a public space. They were choosing to listen to their own curated soundtrack instead of the sounds of the city around them. It was the birth of the personal media experience, the great-grandfather of the teenager walking down the street today, completely absorbed in the music playing on their AirPods. In this view, the radio hat wasn't a dead end. It was a prophecy. It was a clumsy, first draft of the 21st century world, a world where we all carry our own personalized soundscapes with us wherever we go. The upbeat swing music from the radio hat fades. The dream of a personal, portable companion, a machine that could entertain you and keep you company, was a powerful one, and this dream was about to take on a new and much more lifelike fun. The next generation of inventors would try to create more than just a wearable radio. They would try to build a mechanical friend. You are about to witness the birth of the robot pet. The jaunty, tinny music from the radio hat fades away, and you find yourself in a very different environment. You are in a laboratory, surrounded by the hum of electric motors, the glint of chrome, and the smell of ozone. The year is 1950, and you are at the dawn of the age of cybernetics, the science of control and communication in animals and machines. The world is obsessed with the idea of the electronic brain, the thinking machine, the robot, and you are about to meet one of the very first and most influential of these artificial creatures. It doesn't look like a robot from a science fiction movie. There is no gleaming metal humanoid. Instead, you see two small, wheeled objects scurrying around on the floor like oversized cockroaches. They are shaped like tortoises, with smooth, plastic shells covering their mechanical innards. A small photosensor, their eye, is mounted on a spinning turret at the front. These are the Tortoises, and their names are Elmer and Elsie. They are the creation of a brilliant and eccentric British neurophysiologist named William Gray Walter. Walter was interested in the brain. He wanted to understand how a relatively small number of brain cells could produce such complex, seemingly intelligent, and unpredictable behavior. To test his theories, he decided to build a simple, brain-minus-like circuit and see what it would do. Elmer and Elsie are masterpieces of elegant, minimalist design. Their brain consists of only two artificial neurons, two vacuum tubes connected in a simple circuit. They have two senses, a single light sensor and a touch sensor in their shell. And they have two motors, one to drive their wheels forward, and one to turn their steering column. And with this incredibly simple setup, they could exhibit behavior that was astonishingly complex and lifelike. You watch them in action. They are phototropic, meaning they are attracted to light. You switch on a lamp in the corner of the room, and the tortoises will slowly, purposefully, will their way towards it. But their behavior is not simplistic. They are programmed to be attracted to moderate light, but repelled by very bright light. If you shine a flashlight directly at one, it will back away. If it bumps into an obstacle, its touch sensor is triggered, which causes its motors to switch into a different mode, making it turn and move in a random, exploratory way until it finds a clear path. But here is their most ingenious and lifelike feature. Walter wanted his tortoises to be autonomous, to be able to survive on their own. So he built a hutch for them, a small enclosure with a bright light mounted above the entrance. Inside the hutch were the charging contacts for their batteries. When the tortoises' batteries ran low, the internal circuitry would change, and they would suddenly become strongly attracted to the bright light of the hutch. They would navigate their way back home, dovetail into the hutch, make contact with the charging station, and feed until their batteries were full again. They were simple machines, but they demonstrated goal-seeking behavior, self-preservation, and a rudimentary form of learning. And here's a wonderfully weird and specific detail. When two of the tortoises encountered each other, they would often engage in a kind of complex dance. They would be attracted to the lights on each other's heads, but then their touch sensors would be triggered when they bumped, causing them to back away and turn, only to be attracted to the light again. Walter noted with amusement that they would sometimes get stuck in these endless, looping dances for minutes at a time, a behavior that looked remarkably like the courtship rituals of real animals. Gray Walter's tortoises sparked a profound philosophical and scientific debate that continues to this day. What do they tell us about the nature of intelligence? The traditional, top-down view of artificial intelligence argues that intelligence is about complex computation, about having a powerful central brain that can process amounts of information and make logical deductions. But Walter's work was the foundation of a completely different, bottom-up approach. He demonstrated that you don't need a complex brain to produce complex behavior. Simple rules and simple interactions with the environment can give rise to emergent behavior that looks incredibly intelligent and purposeful. His tortoises suggested that intelligence isn't something that happens in a disembodied brain. It's something that emerges from the dynamic interplay between a body, its simple nervous system, and its environment. In this view, a creature doesn't need to think I am hungry. I must find food. It just needs a simple circuit that says when battery is low, move towards light. Was this real intelligence, or just a clever simulation of it? And where is the line between the two? Gray Walter's tortoises forced us to confront that question for the first time. The dream of an artificial companion, a machine that could mimic the behaviors of a living creature, was born. It was a dream of creating a clean, predictable, an obedient friend. And this desire to use technology to solve the messy problems of life was about to be applied to one of the most widespread and intractable habits of the 20th century, smoking. Get ready for a collection of gadgets designed to make a very unhealthy habit seem slightly more scientific. The quiet, contemplative whirring of the robot tortoises fades, and you find yourself in a very different atmosphere. The air is hazy, thick with the sweet, acrid smell of tobacco smoke. You are in the mid-20th century, the golden age of smoking. It's a world where doctors endorse their favorite cigarette brands in magazine ads, where movie stars make smoking look impossibly glamorous, and where almost every adult, and many teenagers, seem to have a cigarette permanently attached to their hand. But even in this smoke-filled paradise, a small seed of anxiety has been planted. The first scientific studies linking smoking to lung cancer and other diseases are starting to appear. People love smoking, but they are beginning to suspect it might not be very good for them. This conflict, the desire to continue a pleasurable but dangerous habit, created a booming market for a whole new category of gadget, the safer smoking device. You are about to enter a world of bizarre cigarette holders, strange filters, and quixotic pipes, all designed with the magical thinking that a little bit of technology could somehow strip the danger away from the vice. You find yourself in a smoke shop. A tobacconist is filled with pipes, cigars, and all the latest smoking accessories. A gentleman is looking for a way to reduce his tar intake. The shopkeeper doesn't suggest he smoke less. Instead, he presents him with the latest marvel of scientific smoking, the filtered cigarette holder. It's an elegant, slender tube, often made of bakelite or polished wood, into which you would insert your regular, unfiltered cigarette. But inside this holder is a tiny, replaceable filter, a small cotton plug or a chamber filled with absorbent crystals. The marketing claims were bold. They promised to trap the harmful tars and irritants while still delivering the full, rich flavor of the tobacco. It was the best of both worlds, a way to have your cake and smoke it too. Of course, these tiny filters were largely ineffective, removing only a tiny fraction of the harmful chemicals, but they offered something much more powerful: psychological comfort. They allowed a smoker to feel that they were doing something responsible, that they were taking control of their health, without having to do the one thing that would actually work: quit. But why stop at filtering one cigarette when you could manage an entire pack at once? You see on the counter another, much stranger device. It looks like a large, ornate smoking pipe, but instead of a single bowl for tobacco, it has a circular rack with slots for 20 cigarettes. This is the 20- cigarette pipe. The idea was that you would load an entire pack of cigarettes into the device, light them all, and then smoke them through the single mouthpiece. It wasn't about convenience. The bizarre claim was that by passing the smoke from 20 cigarettes through a single, long chamber, the smoke would be mellowed, cooled, and purified by the time it reached your lungs. It was a completely nonsensical piece of pseudo-science. A gadget that solved a non-existent problem in the most complicated way imaginable. And here's a wonderfully weird and specific detail that captures the sheer novelty of the era. The quest for a safer cigarette led to the invention of the water-filtered cigarette. These were cigarettes that had a tiny, hollow chamber built into the filter, which the smoker was supposed to fill with a single drop of water before lighting up. The marketing suggested that bubbling the smoke through this minuscule drop of water would provide the same purifying effect as a traditional hookah pipe. It was a tiny, portable water pipe in every cigarette, a feature that was fiddly, messy, and almost certainly useless. This whole parade of strange smoking gadgets has led to a fascinating debate among historians of public health and marketing. What was the real function of these devices? Were they genuine, if misguided, attempts by inventors to reduce the harm of smoking, based on the limited scientific understanding of the time? This is one perspective. It sees the inventors of filtered holders and water-pipe cigarettes as well-intentioned innovators, trying to apply engineering principles to a public health problem. They were the harm reduction pioneers of their day. However, A more cynical and widely accepted view is that these gadgets were a brilliant marketing strategy, developed by the tobacco industry itself to counter the growing health concerns. In this view, the industry knew that filters and holders did very little to make smoking safer, but they also knew that these devices were incredibly effective at one thing: reassuring nervous smokers. By constantly introducing new scientific filters and doctor-approved holders, the industry could create the illusion of progress and safety. They were selling hope, not health. The gadgets were not a solution to the problem. They were a tool to prolong the problem, to keep people smoking by assuaging their fears. Was this a story of earnest, a failed invention, or was it one of the most cynical and successful marketing campaigns in history? The haze of the smoke shop clears. The dream of a technological fix for a dangerous habit would eventually give way to the much more effective, but less gadget-driven strategies of public health, education, and regulation. But the grander dream, the one that has captivated inventors for over a century, the dream of a machine that could conquer not just our bad habits, but the tyranny of the road itself, was just getting started. You are about to enter the endlessly optimistic and endlessly frustrating world of the flying car. The smoky, wood-spangled world of the tobacconist shop dissolves, and you find yourself in a place of boundless optimism and gleaming chrome. You are at a mid-20th century World's Fair, a cathedral of the future. The air is filled with the excited buzz of the crowd and the promises of a better world through technology. You see exhibits for amazing new materials like nylon and plastic, demonstrations of a magical picture box called a television, and, taking pride of place in the central pavilion, the ultimate symbol of future progress, the flying car. It sits on a rotating pedestal, a beautiful, streamlined, teardrop-shaped vehicle with shimmering metallic paint and white wall tires. It looks like a car, but attached to its roof is a large, folded propeller, and its sleek fenders hint at hidden, retractable wings. The brochure promises that this is the amphibian, the aero car, the autoplane, the solution to all of our transportation woes. No more traffic jams, no more crowded highways in the world of tomorrow. The brochure cheerfully explains. You will simply drive your car to the edge of town, unfold the wings, and take to the sky, soaring effortlessly to your destination. This dream, the dream of a personal vehicle that could seamlessly transition from the road to the air, is one of the most powerful and persistent technological fantasies of the last 100 years, and you are here at its hopeful, optimistic beginning. The first serious attempts to build a flying car, or road-able aircraft, began almost as soon as the airplane and the automobile were invented. One of the earliest pioneers was a man named Glenn Curtiss, a rival of the Wright brothers. In 1917, he unveiled his autoplane. It was essentially a large, tri-plane aircraft with a car-like body, complete with headlights and a comfortable, enclosed cabin. It did manage a few brief hops, but it never truly flew. It was more of a plane that you could, in theory, doctor very slowly, than it was a car that could fly. But the golden age of the flying car was the post-World War era, the period you are in now. The war had supercharged aviation technology and produced a generation of pilots and engineers who believed anything was possible. The most famous and most successful of these post-war designs was the aero car, created by an inventor named Moult Taylor. You see a demonstration. The aero car looks like a small, slightly quirky to-seat car. It has a pusher propeller mounted at the very back. The truly ingenious part is what it tows behind it, a trailer that contains the wings and tail section. To convert it for flight, you would unfold the wings, attach them to the car body, connect the driver shaft to the propeller, and, after a pre-flight check, you would be ready for takeoff. It was a true, working hybrid. Several models were built. They were fully certified by the aviation authorities, and they flew beautifully. Moult Taylor even secured a deal with a major auto manufacturer to put them into mass production. The dream was about to become a reality, and here's a wonderfully weird and specific detail that highlights the sheer 10-2 optimism of the era. To promote his aero car, Walt Taylor once used it for a publicity stunt. He flew it to a radio station in Oregon for an interview. After the interview, he converted it back to car mode, but instead of driving home, he hooked up the radio station's transmitter to the car's engine. And for the next hour, his aero car actually powered the station's live broadcast. It wasn't just a car and a plane, it was also a mobile generator. So if the aero car worked, if it was certified, if a deal was in place, why aren't our skies filled with them today? This is the central, nagging question in the history of the flying car, a puzzle that has led to a major debate. Why has this dream, which has always seemed just around the corner, never arrived? One school of thought argues that it is a purely technological problem. The flying car is the ultimate compromise. To be a good car, a vehicle needs to be heavy, sturdy, and have features like bumpers and safety glass. To be a good plane, it needs to be as lightweight as possible. The two sets of requirements are fundamentally at odds. The result is a machine that is both a bad car, it's flimsy and inefficient on the road, and a bad plane. It's heavy and has poor aerodynamics. The aero car worked, but it didn't do either job particularly well. In this view, the flying car is a technological paradox, a flawed concept that can never be truly perfected. However, another school of thought argues that the obstacles are not technological, but social, economic, and regulatory. They contend that we could, and have, built workable flying cars. The real problem is everything else. Imagine a world full of flying cars. Who would pilot them? Would every driver need a full pilot's license? Who would be the air traffic controllers for this chaotic swarm of personal aircraft? What about noise pollution? And, most importantly, what about safety? A fender minor bender on the ground is an inconvenience. A fender minor bender at 3.0 feet is a catastrophe for everyone below. In this view, the flying car has failed not because we can't build it, but because we, as a society, are not remotely prepared for the logistical and regulatory nightmare it would create. The dream of the flying car is easy. The reality of the flying car traffic jam is impossible. The gleaming promise of the World's Fair exhibit fades. The flying car would remain a persistent dream, always 5 years in the future. But the desire to create a revolutionary personal vehicle, to break free from the constraints of the conventional automobile, did not die. It just got weirder. The next generation of inventors would try to solve the problem of personal transport by getting rid of not just the wings, but most of the wheels as well. The bright, optimistic future of the World's Fair, with its gleaming flying cars, shrinks down to a much more focused and much more orderly reality. The dream of conquering the sky gives way to the much more immediate challenge of conquering the pavement in the most stylishly impractical way possible. You are still in the world of personal transportation experiments, but the ambition has become smaller, stranger, and decidedly more circular. You are entering the age of the mono wheel. Imagine you are on a city street in the 1930 seconds. A strange machine rolls past. It's a single, massive wheel, perhaps 6 feet in diameter, and sitting inside this giant wheel, on a seat suspended on a smaller, thinner rail, is the driver. He steers by leaning, and a small gasoline engine mounted next to him drives the great wheel forward. This is the Dynasphere, one of the most famous and photographed mono wheels of its time. It looks like a giant, motorized hamster wheel for humans, a vehicle that is equal parts terrifying and magnificent. The idea of the mono wheel, a single minus wheel vehicle, has a surprisingly long history, with patents dating back to the late 19th century. The concept was driven by a simple, if flawed, piece of logic. A single, large wheel, inventors argued, would be more efficient than 2 smaller ones. It would have less rolling resistance and would be able to glide over bumps and obstacles smoothly. It was an attempt to achieve maximum efficiency through minimalist design. You see one of the earliest designs, from the 1860 seconds. It was a human-powered mono wheel, a vast, skeletal hoop that the rider would sit inside and pedal, like a unicycle from a fever dream. But the true golden age of the mono wheel was the 1930 seconds, when the development of small, Lightweight gasoline engines made powered versions possible. You find yourself at a racetrack, watching a demonstration of another famous design, the Motor UOTA, built by the Italian inventor Davide C. I.S. Laghi. Unlike the Dynasphere, where the driver sat inside the wheel, the Motor UOTA rider sat astride the top of the wheel, like on a motorcycle. It was incredibly fast, reportedly reaching speeds of over 80 miles per hour. But it was also incredibly dangerous. The rider was perched precariously high, with no real protection, on a machine that was notoriously difficult to steer and almost impossible to stop quickly. And here we come to the two wonderfully weird and inherent design flaws that doomed the monowheel from the start. The first is a problem called gerbling. This is the terrifying possibility that if the driver accelerates or brakes too quickly, the inner frame that holds the driver and the engine could lose traction with the outer wheel and start to spin helplessly inside the hoop. Like a hamster in its wheel, you would become a passenger in your own out-minus control centrifuge. The second, even more fundamental problem, is steering. A single wheel wants to go in a straight line. To turn, the driver has to lean their body, shifting the center of gravity. This works reasonably well at low speeds, but at high speeds, it becomes incredibly unstable. And, of course, you have absolutely no peripheral vision. Your view of the world is perpetually framed by the giant where you are sitting inside. It's a vehicle that combines the instability of a unicycle with the visibility of a horse wearing blinders. This spectacular impracticality has led to a historical debate. Were the inventors of the monowheel serious engineers, or were they simply showmen and eccentrics? One view is that they were genuine innovators who were exploring a radical, if ultimately flawed, concept in vehicle dynamics. They were pushing the boundaries of what was possible, and their failures were a necessary part of the inventive process. Men like C.A.S. Laghi and J. A. Purves, the inventor of the Dynasphere, were serious engineers who saw a genuine, scientific advantage in the mono-wheel design. However, another, more plausible view is that the primary purpose of the mono-wheel was not transportation, but spectacle. These machines were not designed to be practical commuter vehicles. They were designed to be jaw-dropping, attention-grabbing oddities. They were perfect for appearing in newsreels, for performing at fairs and exhibitions, and for generating publicity. The Dynasphere was never going to replace the family sedan, but it was guaranteed to get its picture in the paper. In this interpretation, the monowheel wasn't a failed vehicle. It was a highly successful piece of performance art, a rolling advertisement for the limitless, and sometimes ridiculous, ingenuity of the machine age. The roar of the monowheel's tiny engine fades away. The dream of a single minus-wheeled future would remain on the fringes of transportation history, a recurring curiosity for backyard tinkerers and daredevils. But the spirit that drove his creation, the desire to solve a problem the most unconventional way possible, the belief that a radical new design could change the world, is the same spirit that unites all the strange gadgets on our journey. We have seen helmets to block out the world, machines to replicate a horse, and cars that were supposed to fly. It's time to take a step back and ask a fundamental question. Why do we invent such strange things? The wobbly, precarious world of the monowheel stabilizes, and you find yourself in a quieter, more reflective space. You are surrounded by the ghosts of all the gadgets you have encountered on your journey. You see the brassy gleam of the Isolator helmet, the polished wood of a Victorian chamber horse, the ghostly wings of Leonardo's ornithopter, and the charming absurdity of the radio hat. They are a collection of magnificent failures, of brilliant dead ends, of dreams that never quite took flight. And as you stand amidst this museum of weirdness, you begin to ponder the deeper question: what drives a human being to invent something so strange? What is the common psychological thread that connects all of these odd gadgets? The first and most obvious answer is the simple, noble desire to solve a problem. Every single one of these inventions, no matter how bizarre it looks to us now, began with a real, perceived problem. The world is too noisy, so Hugo Gernsback builds a helmet to block it out. My liver is sluggish from a sedentary office job. So drive, Thunder builds a machine to need. We need to cross rough terrain. So Professor Trugden builds a horse with mechanical legs. The human mind is a problem-solving engine. An invention is its natural output. These gadgets are simply the physical manifestation of that fundamental human impulse to look at the world and say, I can fix that. But this impulse is fueled by a second, and even more powerful, this optimism. To be an inventor, you have to be an almost pathological optimist. You have to believe that progress is possible, that the future can be better than the present, and that a clever arrangement of gears, levers, or vacuum tubes can make it so. The inventors of the flying car didn't just see the traffic jams of today. They saw the open skies of tomorrow. The designers of the early telephone didn't just hear the static. They heard the promise of a world connected by the human voice. It is profound, and sometimes tragically misplaced. Faith in the power of technology to improve human life is the rocket fuel of invention. It's the belief that, with enough ingenuity, there is no problem, no matter how large, that cannot be solved. But there is a third, and perhaps more subtle, element at play here, one that explains why the solutions are often so weird, and that is the inventor's love for the process itself. For many of these creators, the goal wasn't just to solve the problem, but to solve it in a particularly clever, elegant, or theatrical way. There is a joy in pure mechanism, in the intricate dance of a well-miner's designed machine. Why build a simple wheeled cart when you can build a magnificent, clanking mechanical man? Why use a simple filter when you can design a pipe that smokes 20 cigarettes at once? There is a sense of playfulness, of intellectual showmanship. At work here, the invention is not just a tool. It's a performance. It's the inventor showing off, a magician revealing a brilliant, surprising new trick. And here's a wonderfully specific detail that illustrates this perfectly. In the 18th century, a French inventor named Jacques de Vaucanson built a series of incredible automata. His most famous was the digesting duck. It was a mechanical duck that could flap its wings, quack, drink water, eat grain from a person's hand, and then, after a short time, excrete a small pellet. It was a global sensation. Vaucanson claimed he had replicated the entire digestive process. The truth, of course, was that it was a clever trick. A hidden compartment stored the pre-loaded droppings. But the point wasn't to fool people. The point was the sheer, breathtaking ingenuity of the mechanism. It was a celebration of the machine, a demonstration that the natural world, in all its complexity, could be replicated and even improved upon by the clockwork mind of a human being. This has led to a major philosophical debate about the very nature of invention and progress. Is the history of technology irrational? Linear march towards ever greater efficiency and perfection. This is the Whig view of technological history. It sees a straight line from the steam man to the modern robot, from the radio hat to the smartphone. In this story, the weird gadgets are simply the clumsy, early draft, the necessary but ultimately discarded steps on the inevitable path to the superior technologies of today. But another school of thought argues that this is a complete misunderstanding of how innovation works. It contends that the history of technology is not a straight line, but a chaotic, branching bush. There is no determined path. At any given moment, there are hundreds of different possible solutions to a problem, and the one that wins is not always the most efficient or the most elegant. It is often the one that best fits the social, economic, and cultural needs of its time. In this view, the weird gadgets are not failures on the path to the right answer. They were the right answer, for a brief moment, for a specific set of circumstances. They are a powerful reminder that the future is not inevitable, and that the world we live in today is just one of many possible worlds that could have been. So these strange gadgets are born from a cocktail of problem-solving, optimism, and pure, joyful tinkering. They are the misfits, the curiosities, the beautiful losers of technological history. But does that mean they were useless? Does a failed invention have any value? The answer, as you're about to see, is a resounding yes, because often, The solution to one problem accidentally becomes the key to a completely different one. Decades later, you are still in this imaginary museum, this hall of magnificent failures. You look at the Dinosphere, that wonderfully impractical mono wheel, and you see a dead end. You look at the Brewster body shield, that absurdly heavy suit of armor, and you see a fatal misunderstanding of the modern battlefield. It's easy to look at these objects and to laugh, to see them as comical footnotes in the grand, successful story of technology. But that would be missing the most important and surprising lesson that these odd gadgets have to teach us, and that is failure is the secret ingredient of success. An invention that fails to solve the problem it was designed for can, decades or even centuries later, become the perfect solution for a problem its inventor never even dreamed of. The history of technology is a history of brilliant and useful accidents. Let's go back to Hero of Alexandria. He used his genius for pneumatics and steam power to build magical toys for temple self-opening doors and his spinning EOLI pile. In his own time, these were novelties, clever tricks to inspire art. As we discussed, they never lead to an industrial revolution. His inventions were, in a practical, economic sense, a failure. But his writings were preserved, and over 500 years later, when the scientists and engineers of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment were first beginning to grapple with the principles of steam power, they went back and read Hero. His work provided the crucial, foundational spark. The EOLI pile didn't power a factory in ancient Alexandria, but it helped to power the imagination of the men who would eventually build the steam engines that changed the world. A failed toy became the seed of a revolution. Or consider the strange Victorian obsession with stereoscopy. You find yourself looking at a beautiful wooden stereoscope viewer from the 1850s. A person would look through the two lenses at a card that had two almost identical photographs printed side by minus side. The viewer would merge these two flat images into a single, stunningly 3-dimensional scene. It was a huge fad. Every middle-class parlor had a stereoscope and a collection of cards showing everything from the Swiss Alps to the pyramids of Egypt. It was the 19th-century version of virtual reality. But, as a technology, it was a failure. It was a parlor game, a novelty. It had no practical application. It was eventually replaced by photography, and then by cinema. The stereoscope was relegated to the dusty attic of history, or was it? Fast forward 100 years. During World War II, military photo-analysts needed a way to study aerial reconnaissance photos to identify enemy positions and assess bomb damage. They needed to be able to see the terrain in 3 dimensions, and the tool they used to do this was the stereoscope. By looking at 2 aerial photos, taken from slightly different angles, through a stereoscope viewer, they could see the landscape in 3D. Allowing them to accurately measure the height of buildings and the depth of trenches. A failed Victorian parlor game became a vital tool of military intelligence, helping to win the war. And here's a wonderfully weird and specific example of this principle. In the 1960s, a toy company called A.C. Gilbert Company, famous for their Raider sets, released a new product, the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. It was a children's chemistry set that came with, among other things, for real, albeit low-level, radioactive ore samples. It even included a Geiger counter and a cloud chamber for tracking the paths of alpha particles. The goal was to get kids excited about nuclear physics. Unsurprisingly, it was a massive commercial failure. Parents were, for some reason, not thrilled about buying their children a radioactive toy. It was pulled from the shelves after only a year. It was a failed toy, but the principle behind it, the idea of using small, safe, hands-on experiments to teach complex scientific ideas became a cornerstone of modern science education. The failed atomic energy lab was a clumsy, early draft of the interactive exhibits you see in science museums all over the world today. This principle of accidental success, of exaptation as the biologist Stephen Jay Gould called it, has led to a profound debate about how we should encourage innovation. The traditional, goal-oriented model says, that we should identify a problem and then invest money and research into solving that specific problem. This is how we got to the moon. You define the mission, and you execute it. But another view argues that the most revolutionary breakthroughs rarely come from this kind of focused research. They come from pure curiosity minus driven, blue minus sky research. They come from letting smart people play around with weird ideas without any specific goal in mind. This view argues that we should fund the modern minus day equivalents of Hero of Alexandria or the Victorian stereoscope makers. We should fund their useless research. Because we never know when a failed toy, a strange gadget, or a bizarre scientific principle will turn out to be the key that unlocks a completely new world. Did the great breakthroughs of history come from directed research or from playful curiosity? The answer, of course, is both. But as you stand here, surrounded by these wonderful, failed gadgets, you are reminded of the immense, unpredictable power of the second approach. These inventions were not failures. They were seeds, planted in the soil of history, waiting patiently for the right conditions to sprout in the most unexpected of ways. They are a testament to the fact that in the world of invention, nothing is ever truly wasted. The imaginary museum of failed gadgets begins to dissolve, and you find yourself standing on a high precipice, looking back at the entire, winding road of human invention. You see the path littered with the beautiful wreckage of discarded dreams, the brass and leather of a steam map, the delicate linen of an aerial screw, the bakelite and chrome of a 20- cigarette pipe. And from this vantage point, you begin to see the deeper patterns, the common threads that bind all of these strange and wonderful objects together. You start to understand the very psychology of why we invent. At its core, every single one of these gadgets, from the most profound to the most ridiculous, is a story about the relationship between humanity and its problems. And the first and most fundamental story they tell is one of dissatisfaction. Invention begins with the quiet, nagging feeling that the world, as it currently exists, is not good enough. The human being is a creature that is perpetually dissatisfied with its own limitations. We cannot fly, so we dream of wings. We are not strong enough, so we dream of machines to do our work. We are lonely, so we dream of mechanical companions. We are afraid of the noise, so we build a helmet to make it silent. These gadgets are monuments to our own perceived inadequacies. They are born from the gap between the world as it is and the world as we wish it could be. This dissatisfaction, however, is immediately coupled with that second great driver we talked about, a profound and uniquely human optimism. It is the belief that these problems, these inadequacies, are not permanent. They are solvable. This is the faith of the inventor. To look at the problem of human flight and to see not an insurmountable barrier, but a mechanical puzzle waiting to be solved, requires an almost superhuman level of confidence in the power of human ingenuity. Every one of these strange gadgets, even in its failure, is a victory of hope over experience. It is a testament to the belief that the future does not have to be like the past. But there is a third, more complex element at play here, one that explains why so many of these inventions seem so wonderfully weird and, in retrospect, so wrong-headed, and that is the inventor's tendency to get trapped by a powerful metaphor. The human mind understands the world through analogy. We look at a new, complex problem, and we try to understand it in terms of an old, familiar one. And sometimes, that metaphor is so powerful that it becomes a prison. Think of Leonardo da Vinci. His metaphor for flight was the bird. It was a beautiful, powerful, and deeply intuitive metaphor, but it was also wrong. By focusing so intensely on replicating the flapping wing of a bird, he was blinded to the more abstract, and ultimately more correct, principles of aerodynamics. His powerful metaphor prevented him from seeing the true solution. You see the same thing with the walking machines of the 19th century. The metaphor was the horse. The inventors were so determined to build a mechanical horse that they failed to appreciate the profound, simple genius of the wheel. They were trapped in a biological metaphor, unable to see the more elegant mechanical solution that was right in front of them. And here we come to a wonderfully specific and modern example of this same trap. For decades, The dominant metaphor in artificial intelligence research was the human brain. The goal was to build a thinking machine, an electronic brain that could reason and calculate like a person. This led to incredible breakthroughs, but it also led us down some strange paths. We spent years trying to teach computers to play chess like a human grandmaster, using intuition and strategy. But the real breakthrough came when we abandoned that metaphor. The AI either finally beat the world champion. Deep Blue didn't play like a human at all. It won through brute force calculation, analyzing hundreds of millions of moves per second. It was an alien on intelligence. The bird metaphor for flight was a dead end. The brain metaphor for intelligence was, in some ways, also a limitation. This has led to a major debate in the philosophy of science and creativity. Is true innovation a process of the minus box thinking, of radical, paradigm shifting new ideas that come from nowhere? Or is it always a process of the minus box thinking, of working within the established metaphors and models of our time, and just tweaking and improving them? One view, the romantic view of genius, holds that great breakthroughs come from a complete break with the past. It sees inventors like the Wright brothers, who abandoned the bird metaphor, as true revolutionaries. But another, more pragmatic view argues that no one ever truly thinks outside the box. We are all creatures of our time, and our thinking is always shaped by the metaphors and tools available to us. Even the Wright brothers were working within a long tradition of glider experiments. Their genius was not in creating something from nothing, but in taking the existing metaphor and giving it a crucial, brilliant, new twist. So the strange gadgets of history are the product of our dissatisfaction, our optimism, and the powerful, sometimes misleading, metaphors we use to understand the world. They are the tangible evidence of the human mind grappling with its own limitations. But what is their ultimate legacy? Are they just amusing failures? Or do they serve a more important purpose? The high, philosophical perch from which you were observing the psychology of invention begins to descend. You are back in the workshop, back among the gadgets themselves. You look at the failed flying car, the clunky robot tortoise, the impractical mono wheel. You've established that these were not, in themselves, successful products. They are the beautiful losers of history. But this leads to the most practical and perhaps most important question of all. What is the relationship between these failures and the successes that came later? Is failure just failure? Or is it, as the old cliché goes, the mother of invention? The answer is written in the very DNA of the gadgets that surround you today. The technologies that define your modern world are not pristine creations, born fully formed from the mind of a single genius. They are messy, sprawling family trees, with hundreds of strange, forgotten ancestors. The weird gadgets of the past were not dead ends. They were crucial, and often on a canoed lead, links in the evolutionary chain. Let's go back to that absurdly cumbersome Brewster body shield from World War I. As a piece of military equipment, it was a total failure. It was too heavy, too restrictive. But think about what it was. It was a wearable, protective shell, made from advanced materials, designed to stop a high-velocity projectile. What is a modern SWAT team officer's tactical vest? What is a bomb disposal expert suit? They are the direct, linear descendants of the Brewster shield. The problem in World War I was one of material science. They didn't have the lightweight ceramics and polymers we have today, but the concept, the fundamental idea of a rigid, bulletproof torso covering with sound. The failed invention of 1917 wasn't wrong. It was just early. It was a prophecy waiting for the right materials to make it practical. Or consider the charmingly goofy radio hat. It was a novelty, a fad that quickly faded. But what was its core technological idea? It was the miniaturization and personalization of electronic media. It was the dream of a self-contained, wearable device that could give you a private connection to a world of information and entertainment. Does that sound familiar? Every smartphone in every pocket, every pair of wireless earbuds, every smartwatch on every wrist is the fulfillment of the promise that the radio had first made. The components are different. The clumsy vacuum tubes and crystal sets have been replaced by microchips and lithium-ion batteries, but the fundamental human desire it was trying to serve is exactly the same. The radio didn't fail. It just had to wait 70 years for the technology to catch up with its ambition. And here's a wonderfully specific and powerful example of this principle at work. In 1968, a computer scientist named Ivan Sutherland created the world's first virtual and augmented reality system. He called it the Sword of Damocles. It was a terrifyingly complex and heavy piece of equipment. The user had to wear a massive head-mounted display that was so heavy it had to be suspended from the ceiling by a mechanical arm. It was tethered to a room-sized computer. It was a monstrous, impractical, and wildly expensive research project. By any commercial standard, it was a colossal failure. But every single VR and AR headset that exists today, from the Oculus Rift to the Microsoft HoloLens, is a direct descendant of that unwieldy, ceiling-mounted contraption. Sutherland's failure established the fundamental technical and conceptual framework for an entire industry that is only now, half a century later, beginning to enter the mainstream. This has led to a major debate in the world of business and innovation studies. How should a company or a society treat failure? The traditional business model is terrified of failure. Failure is expensive, it's embarrassing, and it's something to be avoided at all costs. Companies focus on incremental improvements to existing, successful products because it's safe. Thus a more modern approach, born out of the culture of Silicon Valley, argues that failure is not just acceptable, it is essential. This is the fail fast, fail often philosophy. It argues that the only way to find the truly revolutionary new ideas is to try 100 different, crazy things, knowing that 99 of them will fail. The key is to see failure not as an end state, but as a data minus gathering process. Each failure, each weird gadget that doesn't quite work, teaches you something valuable. It closes off one bad path and points you towards a more promising one. In this view, a research and development lab should not be a clean, efficient factory for producing successful products. It should be a chaotic, messy skunkworks, a playground for brilliant minds to build and break things, a place where failure is not just tolerated, but celebrated as a sign that you are pushing the boundaries of what is possible. So when you look at these strange gadgets from the past, you are not looking at a graveyard of bad ideas. You are looking at a nursery. You are looking at the audacious, clumsy, and absolutely essential first drafts of your own world. Each one is a vital lesson, paid for by the time, the money, and the hopeful, optimistic spirit of an inventor who dared to build a future that they themselves would never get to see. And that, in the end, is the greatest victory of all. The echoes of the workshop fade one last time, and you are left with a final, profound realization. The true legacy of these strange and wonderful gadgets is not their accidental contribution to the successful technologies of today. It is something deeper, something more fundamental. Their ultimate value lies not in what they did, but in what they represent. They are monuments to the single most powerful and irrepressible force in human history, the imagination. Think about it. Every single object on our journey, from the silliest to the most sublime, began its life as a flickering, insubstantial image in a human mind. Before the Isolator was a heavy brass helmet, it was just Hugo Gernsback's idea of what silence might look like. Before Leonardo's ornithopter was a complex drawing of wood and linen, it was just his mental picture of a man soaring like a bird. Before the robot tortoise was a bundle of wires and vacuum tubes, it was just W. Gray Walter's curiosity about what a simple, mechanical brain might do. These gadgets are the fossilized remains of thoughts. They are imagination made tangible. And what this parade of weirdness teaches us, with startling clarity, is that the human imagination is not a neat, orderly, or practical thing. It is wild. It is chaotic. It is playful. It does not move in a straight line towards the most efficient solution. It meanders. It explores. It takes strange detours down fashionably impractical paths. It wants to build a working horse, not because it's a good idea, but simply to see if it can be done. It wants to build a hat that is also a radio, because the very juxtaposition is delightful. These gadgets are a testament to the fact that our minds are not just problem-solving calculators. They are playgrounds. This playful, impractical nature of the imagination is what so often gets lost in our modern, efficiency-obsessed world. We are taught to value the practical, the profitable, the scalable. We are encouraged to color inside the lines, to follow the established models, to innovate, but only in predictable, marketable ways. But the history of these strange gadgets whispers a different lesson. It tells us that the most powerful ideas often come from the fringes, from the places where people are not afraid to look ridiculous, to fail spectacularly, to pursue an idea not for its utility, but for its sheer, joyful absurdity. And here's a wonderfully specific and final little detail that captures this spirit. In the 1972, an artist and inventor named Chris Burden created a work of art called Trans-Fix. For this piece, he had himself crucified, with nails hammered through his hands, onto the back of a Volkswagen Beetle. The engine was revved for 2 minutes, filling the garage with a horrific roar, and then it was switched off, and Burden was taken down. It was a bizarre, shocking, and deeply unsettling act. It was not a practical invention. It solved no problem. That it was a powerful, unforgettable act of imagination, a strange and visceral fusion of ancient religious iconography and modern consumer technology. It was, in its own way, a spiritual descendant of the digesting duck and the 20- cigarette pie. It was a testament to the human imagination's enduring need to create strange, new connections. This brings us to the final, great debate that these gadgets inspire. What is the role of imagination in a serious, scientific, and technological world? The traditional, hard-headed view often dismisses it. Imagination is for artists and poets. Science and engineering are for serious people, for data, for calculation, for what is real and provable. But the history of every invention, from the telephone to the spacecraft, proves that this is a false dichotomy. Every single scientific theory, every single engineering breakthrough, began as an act of imagination. It began with someone looking at the world and imagining that it could be different. Albert Einstein, when he was developing his theory of relativity, famously performed a thought experiment where he imagined what it would be like to ride on a beam of light. It was a fantastical, poetic, almost childlike act of imagination, and it led to one of the most profound scientific revolutions in human history. So, the ultimate lesson of the walking horse and the flying car is not about mechanics or aerodynamics. It is about the vital importance of protecting and nurturing the wild, untamed, and sometimes deeply impractical spaces of the human mind. These strange gadgets are a celebration of the dreamer, the tinkerer, the eccentric, the glorious failure. They remind us that the ability to imagine a future that is different from the present is the greatest tool we have ever invented. And it is the one thing that will allow us to continue to solve the problems and dream the dreams of all the futures yet to come. And so, our tour of the attic of history comes to a gentle end. The images of the strange and wonderful gadgets begin to soften, their sharp metal edges blurring into the comfortable darkness of your room. The whirring of the clockwork and the hissing of the steam fades away, leaving only the quiet, steady sound of your own breathing. Let go of the gears and the levers, the wings and the wheels. Let the stories of these hopeful, brilliant dreamers dissolve into the background. Their work is done. Your day is done. The only thing left to do now is to let the gentle machinery of your own mind ease you into the world of sleep. Feel the quiet pull of your pillow, the soft weight of your blanket. You are drifting now on a slow and silent current, away from the world of invention and into the world of dreams, where the only limit is your own boundless imagination. The end of the article. Good night.